The US performed fairly strongly with quite a few surprises in the details. What's the general picture?
Yeah, it seemed reasonable to assume there were going to be some hits on the business. And when we started into the report and tried to, amass the available public statistics, we were constantly surprised. Oh, no, this is doing quite well. No, no, this is actually up significantly over the year before. And there were some indicators of that earlier in the year, but as the tally of stats came together towards the end of the year, it was a stellar year for book publishing in the United States and Canada. What it wasn't a stellar year for was book selling. And book selling by year end was down by about a third year to year. And of course, much of that was earlier in the lockdown, but still, they did not.
Bookselling, you mean brick and mortar stationary bookshops?
Yes, yeah. Book, it leaves out the online. It's just the brick and mortar. That's correct. And so down by about a third. Um, and yet, yet these book sales, the publishers are enjoying these very good book sales. So where's that disconnect? Well, the disconnect is that, of course, online, and of course, Amazon, but also some alternative retailers that were not thought of as particularly successful with online book marketing. Walmart and Target, two very, very big US chains, they were picking up a lot of the slack and enjoyed stellar years as booksellers. And so the interesting thing there is that I'm catching, I have a cup of tea. What's interesting is it did strengthen Amazon, but it didn't cement their position. It introduced some viable competition.
And there was even a new online e-commerce platform for independents, right?
Yeah, bookshop.org. And that's a, what to say. I mean, on the one hand, one can only be enthusiastic. If you love this business, we want all these alternatives. And if you love book publishing, you love independent bookstores. I mean, that's a given, right? No one goes, oh, independents, let's get rid of them. No, I mean, it's core. But then you look at the statistics that surround the sales at independent bookstores, and it's less than 10% of overall trade publishing sales go through that sector. And so it is more sentiment than business dynamism. Yet nonetheless, bookshop.org, which has greatly accelerated the ability of independent bookstores to become e-commerce enabled and to sell online, that's a good thing. And they're having significant success.
One of the amazing numbers is that print was so strong and had its best year since 2005, I guess. Um, so it was not all about ebooks have increased and we're back at the levels of 2015, but still, why that very strong position of print? And perhaps as a second move in the same direction, a shift from front list to a very strong backlist, which made uh, two-thirds of all sales.
Good question. Very good question. I get a couple of things come to mind as you're asking that. First, let's talk about print versus digital briefly. So yes, print did have this extraordinary year, but do keep the asterisk there saying, and so did ebooks. They had a resurgence up to 20-25% of sales in many cases, which was, bringing up, they had slipped to about 10% in many cases and now coming back up over 20. So that was a factor. But yes, print, had an even more extraordinary result. When you look at the sector, the type of books being sold, very children's books and young adult. That was adults up 5%, children's 22%, young adults. So all the action in the last 12 months, let's say, was in that area. But then you also ask about the backlist. Well, online favors the backlist. right? The backlist is democratic online, where it's not democratic in retail, where there's so much class divide, let's say, between, support for larger publishers versus independent publishers. On the internet, no one knows you're a dog. So those books it did benefit the backlist to see that increase in online selling over the last year.
Could you say it was a very strong year driven by the readers, the consumers, and less by those industry guys?
Tell me that again.
Would you think that one could say it was a year of the readers, shaped, framed, defined by what the readers wanted, and not so much by those industry guys and their marketing departments?
The publishers weren't running the show. The readers were running the show for once. Yeah, I mean, it was, the draw from COVID was very, very specific. Um, but the bestsellers had a good year too. So there was strength across the board. I read an article the other day that suggested that bestsellers as a percentage of overall sales were down, but nonetheless there were some very, very strong sellers throughout the year. So it seemed to balance, as far as I could see, with that exceptional thing going on with children's books. Which I think is, a blip. I don't think that's representative of a longer term trend.
Um, we have been reading a lot about the big resilience of the book trade as opposed to many other um, businesses. Uh, was this really the resilience of an industry, or was it something broader about how people spend time, how people try to figure out what's going on, making sense of their own lives, of the world outside? How would you define that resilience?
What that's making me think of is the alternate media and its growth during the COVID. So, first statement is, as you see it, you'll see in the report, those who have yet to see it, very good year, of course, for Netflix and its competitors. Very good year for online music. Incredibly good year for video gaming online, multiplayer or single player video gaming. An extraordinary year. And the question, this is one that the industry's been asking for several years, is like, there's 24 hours in a day. Yes, you can multitask to some extent, of course, but can you really be binge watching on Netflix at the same time that you're reading Obama's autobiography? I guess some people do, but and then that gets recorded as multiple time, and there's multiple revenue streams associated with that. But while it's not a zero-sum game, surely there are limits. And at what point, do we see this much feared for development where the explosive growth of non-book media really begins to have a significantly negative impact on book sales?